Imagine being told that something invisible, something glowing in your pocket right now, is quietly rewiring your brain. Not in a sci-fi horror way, but in the subtle dopamine drip way that reshapes how you feel, think, and even love. This isn't a dystopian movie. It's our everyday reality. The phones we scroll, the apps we praise, the platforms we depend on, they've birthed what Jonathan Haidt calls the anxious generation. We are living through a grand psychological experiment, one so enormous and uncontrolled that no ethics board would have ever approved it. Yet every child, every teen, and every adult with a smartphone became a test subject. Now, after more than a decade, the results are in, and they're terrifying. Between 2010 and 2015, rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and loneliness among teenagers, especially girls, skyrocketed. Sleep dropped, focus fractured, and the world's youngest generation, raised in the age of connection, became paradoxically the most disconnected in human history. So the question Haidt forces us to ask is blunt, almost painful. What have we done to our children?
Welcome to The Anxious Generation, a book that doesn't just point fingers at technology, but explains how a deep cultural shift replaced play with screen time, freedom with surveillance, and resilience with fragility. This isn't just about Gen Z or kids. It's about all of us, because when childhood changes, society changes. Who is Jonathan Haidt? Jonathan Haidt isn't another doomsday voice shouting about kids these days. He's a social psychologist at NYU's Stern School of Business, known for exploring moral psychology, how people form beliefs, tribes, and values. You might have heard of his earlier works like The Righteous Mind and The Coddling of the American Mind. Both dissect how culture and ideology shape our thinking. But The Anxious Generation hits deeper. It's personal. It's about his students. Young adults who arrive brilliant on paper, yet fragile in spirit. They fear making mistakes, avoid discomfort, and depend on validation. Haidt calls this shift the great rewiring of childhood. And he believes it happened almost overnight.
Before 2010, childhood looked roughly the same for generations. Kids played outdoors, argued face-to-face, fell off bikes, and built resilience through real experiences. They navigated friendship hierarchies, risk, and boredom. But around 2012, something flipped. Smartphones became universal. Social media, especially Instagram and Snapchat, transformed from tools into social ecosystems. And children, instead of playing in parks, began performing on screens. The result wasn't just behavioral change, it was neurological. Play-based childhood wired human brains for courage, empathy, and social skill. Screen-based childhood wires them for comparison, fear of judgment, and constant stimulation. That's the central argument. We didn't just give kids phones, we replaced an ancient operating system built through millions of years of play, touch, and exploration with a fragile digital one. Ask any adult over 30 what childhood meant, and they'll recall afternoons outside, scraped knees, made-up games, arguments that ended with laughter. Now, ask a child today. Many will tell you their best memories come from online worlds, Roblox, TikTok, Instagram. Not real places, but platforms designed for endless engagement. Haidt argues that the decline of free play is one of the most catastrophic losses of the modern era. Play isn't trivial. It's how children learn independence, negotiation, and self-control. It's the rehearsal space for adult life. Without play, anxiety has nowhere to burn off. Conflict feels terrifying. And instead of building confidence through risk, kids grow fearful of it. Psychologists have even mapped this trend. As playground freedom declined, anxiety disorders in teens began to rise. The less they tested the world, the more the world scared them. So when parents ask, "Why are my kids so anxious?" Haidt's answer is sobering. Because we removed the conditions that teach bravery. The smartphone trap. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Most parents gave smartphones out of love. They wanted safety, connection, convenience. But in reality, smartphones became a portal to relentless psychological stress. Every notification signals social inclusion or exclusion. Every scroll invites comparison. Every like or view number becomes a proxy for self-worth. And this doesn't just drain attention, it rewires dopamine pathways. Kids begin to crave micro-validation rather than genuine experience. The data is stunning. Between 2010 and 2015, teen depression doubled. Self-harm among preteen girls in the U.S. rose by nearly 189%. And across countries, from the UK to Canada to Australia, the same trend emerged at the same time. Different cultures, same tech, same outcome. It's not coincidence, it's causation. Surveillance parenting. Paradoxically, as kids lost freedom, parents gained control, and it made everyone worse off. In previous decades, kids had after-school adventures. They took buses, roamed neighborhoods, met friends unsupervised. Today's kids live under near-total surveillance. GPS tracking, check-ins, cameras, digital monitoring. Haidt calls this safetyism, the illusion that constant protection prevents harm. But instead, it prevents growth. When you remove every possible risk, you also remove the child's sense of agency. And when kids don't feel trusted, they stop trusting themselves. That's how fragility is born, not from weakness, but from overprotection. Reflection moment. Let's pause here, because this isn't just about parenting or policy. It's a mirror for all of us. How much of our own anxiety comes from the same trap? Our phones, our craving for approval, our fear of failure, our obsession with control? Maybe the anxious generation isn't just describing kids. Maybe it's describing us. If you talk to teenagers today, the emotional divide between boys and girls feels like a canyon. The girls are drowning in anxiety, the boys are drifting in apathy. Two sides of the same coin, minted in silicon. The gender divide. Jonathan Haidt calls this the asymmetrical collapse. For girls, social media became a stage. For boys, it became a hiding place. Girls entered the world of images, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, where identity turned performative. Each photo is a resume of self-worth. Each comment is an evaluation. And in that endless audition, girls learned to live under the gaze, to curate, not to be. It's no coincidence that the sharpest spikes in anxiety, depression, and body image issues appear among teenage girls, starting around 2012, the year Instagram went mainstream. What used to be an occasional comparison among friends became a 24-hour feedback loop of inadequacy. The brain, wired for social belonging, began to confuse digital metrics with real acceptance. Imagine being 16 and discovering that your popularity, your perceived beauty, even your likability, is measurable in public numbers and fluctuates every hour. That's not socialization, that's emotional roulette. Boys and the digital drift. Meanwhile, boys found a different escape hatch. They retreated into the digital caves of gaming, pornography, and YouTube rabbit holes. It's not that boys don't crave connection. They do. But in games and online spaces, connection is safe, predictable, controllable. There's no eye contact, no rejection, no vulnerability. Haidt describes this as a social withdrawal epidemic. While girls spiral in hyperconnection, boys vanish into isolation. Both paths lead to the same outcome: fewer real friendships, less dating, and declining confidence in adulthood. Loneliness becomes a default state disguised by digital busyness. The algorithmic trap. Let's pull the camera back. Why does this dynamic feel so universal, so synchronized across nations and cultures? Because behind every post and every scroll, there's an invisible architect, the algorithm. Haidt argues that these systems aren't neutral. They're optimized for engagement, not well-being. That means the content that spreads fastest is the content that triggers emotion, especially outrage, envy, and fear. For adults, this means political polarization. For teenagers, it means identity confusion. They are constantly told who they should be, what they should want, and who to compare themselves with by machines trained on attention economics. The algorithm doesn't ask what will make this person flourish. It asks what will keep them watching. So, when a 13-year-old girl scrolls through hundreds of filtered faces, the algorithm notes her hesitation, her gaze, her micro-engagement, and serves her more of the same. Soon her feed becomes a curated museum of perfection, and her self-image, it begins to fracture. The mental health collapse. One of the most striking findings in The Anxious Generation is how globally consistent the data is. It's not just America. It's the UK, Canada, Australia, the Nordics, even parts of East Asia. Everywhere smartphones and social media became universal, teen mental health declined. Same timeline, same pattern. In psychology, this kind of parallel movement rarely happens without a shared cause. And while correlation isn't always causation, Haidt insists the evidence now meets the threshold. Social media exposure in adolescence is the single largest new variable introduced to human development in the 21st century. We didn't just add a tool, we rewrote the environment of growing up. The loss of embodied reality. For thousands of years, humans developed in physical space. Eye contact trained empathy, touch regulated emotion, boredom sparked imagination. But screens dissolve those cues. When every interaction is mediated by pixels, our brains don't fully encode social learning. We begin to miss the subtleties, the tone of voice, the glance, the pause that teach us how to belong. Haidt calls this the de-embodiment of adolescence. And without embodiment, there's no grounding. Anxiety fills the gap. The mirage of connection. Ironically, the platforms that promise connection often deliver its counterfeit. They simulate intimacy without risk. They offer visibility without understanding. They create constant communication without genuine community. That's why teenagers today can have thousands of followers and still feel invisible. They're surrounded by echoes, not voices. This isn't the loneliness of solitude. It's the loneliness of hyperconnection, when every relationship feels like performance. Reflection break. Think about your own life for a moment. How often do you check your phone without meaning to? How often do you measure your mood by notifications? How often do you feel the quiet ache of scrolling, knowing it doesn't make you happy, but doing it anyway? That's the trap Haidt describes, a culture of constant stimulation that leaves us emotionally starved. And if adults struggle with this, imagine facing it while your brain is still under construction. The attention economy as a public health crisis. In earlier eras, society protected children from dangerous industries: tobacco, alcohol, gambling. Each time, the rule was the same. Kids' brains are too vulnerable for addictive products. But today, we hand them devices that are arguably more potent and call it normal. Haidt's point is clear. The attention economy has become a public health issue. Not metaphorically, literally. He compares social media's effect on the developing brain to sugar on metabolism. Small doses are fine, but constant exposure rewires appetite and reward. When everything becomes a micro hit of novelty, reality feels dull by comparison. Classroom learning, real friendships, family dinners, they all lose their color next to the neon world of the feed. And so we drift deeper into a paradox. Overstimulated yet bored. Connected yet alone. Where do we go from here? Haidt isn't hopeless. He believes the same human ingenuity that created this mess can help fix it if we reclaim responsibility. But first, we must name the disease correctly. Not bad kids, not lazy youth, but a civilization that optimized for engagement instead of well-being. When the metric of success is time on screen, mental health will always lose.
As we close this segment, hold this thought. If technology changed childhood once, it can change it again, but only if adults lead differently. In Part 3, we'll explore why adolescence is uniquely vulnerable, the neuroscience behind digital addiction, and the 4 pillars Haidt proposes for restoring balance: play, independence, community, and limits. Because the next step isn't to throw away the phone, it's to remember what a fully human life feels like offline. Inside the teenage brain, dopamine, dependence, and the lost art of freedom. If you wanted to design a brain that's perfectly primed to get addicted to social media, you'd build a teenage brain. It's a paradox of nature. Adolescence is when the human brain is most plastic, most adaptive, most ready to learn, and therefore most vulnerable to hijack. The dopamine playground. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical. It's the anticipation chemical, the spark that lights before the reward arrives. When you open Instagram or TikTok, the brain doesn't light up when you see a post. It lights up when you scroll, when it expects the next hit of novelty. That tiny moment of uncertainty, will the next thing be amazing, shocking, funny, is the lever that the entire attention economy pulls. And teenagers, with their heightened sensitivity to novelty and peer approval, are walking dopamine reactors. Each like, each heart, each buzz is a mini jackpot. In earlier generations, dopamine was triggered by play, sport, flirting, risk-taking, activities that also taught resilience and social skills. Now, it's triggered by the flick of a thumb. The result? Brains conditioned to chase stimulation, but not satisfaction. Neuroscience of overload. Haidt draws on neuroscience research showing that constant digital engagement floods the brain's reward circuits. Over time, this dulls sensitivity, meaning ordinary life starts to feel gray. A walk, a conversation, a book, all feel too slow, too quiet. And so the phone becomes the only portal to aliveness. The tragedy is that this isn't a moral failure, it's conditioning. Teenagers aren't weak, their brains are simply adapting to the environment they were handed. But adaptation cuts both ways. What the brain learns, it can unlearn. The developmental hijack. Adolescence is supposed to be a rehearsal for adulthood. It's the time when humans push boundaries, explore identity, and learn independence through trial and error. But smartphones short-circuit that process. Instead of testing themselves in real-world situations, arguing, falling in love, getting rejected, teenagers test themselves through metrics, likes, follows, views. Real risks are replaced by symbolic ones, and symbolic risks don't build courage. Haidt calls this the developmental hijack. The same period meant for autonomy has been outsourced to algorithms. So kids appear connected, but remain emotionally underdeveloped, highly attuned to social feedback, yet low in self-regulation.
This is why anxiety feels chronic. Their sense of self rests on platforms they can't control. Freedom as antidote. Here's the irony. The cure for modern anxiety may not be therapy first. It's freedom. Free play, unsupervised exploration, even mild risk. All these experiences rebuild confidence. When a child climbs a tree, gets lost, or solves a problem alone, the brain learns a vital truth. I can handle the world. That belief, self-efficacy, is the opposite of anxiety. Haidt points to research showing that kids allowed independent mobility, walking to school, biking alone, meeting friends without adults, show higher emotional resilience and lower rates of depression. And yet, in most modern societies, we've nearly eliminated that freedom. Fear of danger, despite crime rates dropping for decades, has led parents to lock childhood indoors. We traded real risk for virtual safety, and ended up with virtual lives and real fear. The illusion of safety. Parents often say, "I just want my child to be safe." But safety isn't the absence of risk. It's the presence of competence. A child who never faces difficulty isn't safe. They're unprepared. Haidt argues that we need to expand our definition of safety to include psychological strength. Letting kids fail, struggle, and recover teaches far more than bubble wrapping them ever will. The anxious generation was not born anxious, it was engineered to be. And that means we can engineer our way out by restoring the experiences that build confidence in the first place. The mind-body disconnect. When play disappears, so does movement. Screens replaced not just imagination, but motion. Teenagers today move less than any generation in human history. Exercise, sports, even casual walking have declined sharply. That matters because the body is the original anxiety regulator. When we move, we metabolize stress hormones. We recalibrate mood. Without that outlet, tension builds. Anxiety that once burned off through motion now simmers in the nervous system, seeking release through doom scrolling, self-criticism, or panic. Haidt reminds us the mind is not floating above the body, it is the body, processing experience through sensation. When you still the body but overstimulate the mind, imbalance becomes inevitable. Reflection pause. Let's step back. If you're watching this, you might be part of the first generation to come of age with a digital identity before a real one. Think about that for a second. Before you ever had a full adult self, you had a curated self. Before you knew who you were already posting who you were supposed to be. That gap between the real and the projected self is the breeding ground of anxiety. Because every scroll becomes a mirror that never stops reflecting back doubt. The hope in neuroplasticity. The good news? The brain remains plastic throughout life. What was wired by technology can be rewired by experience. Play again. Move again. Talk face-to-face again. Limit notifications. Set boundaries. Rediscover boredom. Each act of deliberate disengagement is a signal to the brain, the world is still real. I am still here. Haidt isn't advocating nostalgia for the 1990s. He's advocating rebalance, a modern life where tech is a tool, not a habitat. In the next segment, we'll enter the prescription phase of Haidt's work. We'll unpack the 4 pillars of restoration, his roadmap for rebuilding a healthy childhood and society. We'll also see how communities, schools, and parents around the world are already applying these principles and changing lives. Because the anxious generation isn't doomed. It's simply waiting for adults brave enough to lead differently. The 4 pillars of restoration. Every era has its crisis, and every crisis creates a chance for rebirth. Haidt believes that to heal the anxious generation, we must rebuild the 4 pillars that every thriving childhood once stood upon: free play, independence, limits on technology, and meaningful connection. These aren't luxuries, they're the foundations of mental health, confidence, and real community. Let's unpack each one. Pillar 1. Free play, the original classroom. In every human culture, from tribes to modern cities, children learned through play. Play was never just fun. It was how we practiced life without consequences. We learned to negotiate, to cooperate, to fail, to recover. But today, childhood play has been replaced by curated activities: piano classes, structured sports, endless supervision. And when it's not structured, it's digital. We've turned play into performance. Haidt argues that the absence of unsupervised physical play is one of the most powerful predictors of rising anxiety. Because when kids don't get to solve small problems, they grow up fearing big ones. Analogy? It's like building a bridge but never testing it under weight. It looks strong until the first real storm hits. That's what's happening to today's teens. They're emotionally overprotected, but mentally underprepared. So what's the fix? Parents, communities, and schools can start small. Create phone-free zones where kids can just be kids. Encourage outdoor time without adult direction. Let boredom exist. It's the seedbed of creativity. A little bit of freedom builds a lifetime of courage. Pillar 2. Independence, the lost muscle of maturity. Think back to when you were 10 or 12. You might have walked to a friend's house, gone to the market, or played outside until sunset. Those experiences weren't dangerous, they were training. But over the last few decades, our culture replaced independence with supervision. Even small freedoms now feel risky. Haidt calls this the safety trap. Parents mean well, but when they remove every challenge, they accidentally teach helplessness. Key idea: confidence doesn't come from praise, it comes from competence. A child who fixes a bike, cooks a meal, or handles a small problem learns, I can handle the world. That belief is armor against anxiety. So restoring independence isn't about being careless, it's about being courageous. It means parents slowly step back and children step up. Walk to school alone. Solve conflicts with friends without adult mediation. Face setbacks and recover. Each act of independence is a vote for resilience. Pillar 3. Limits on technology. Taking back the mind. Let's be honest, technology isn't going anywhere. The goal isn't to reject it, it's to reclaim control from it. Haidt suggests a simple but radical shift. Treat phones like power tools, useful when needed, dangerous without instruction. He proposes practical steps for families and schools. Delay smartphones until high school, if possible. Delay social media until at least age 16. Create tech-free zones, bedrooms, mealtimes, classrooms. Model boundaries. Adults should do this too. Why does this matter? Because every ping, buzz, and scroll fractures attention, and attention is the foundation of emotional stability. A distracted brain can't process feelings deeply. It just skims life's surface. Rhetorical pause. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly present? No phone nearby, no background noise, just you, your thoughts, and silence. That silence isn't emptiness. It's where identity forms. We can't expect teenagers to discover who they are if we never let them be alone with themselves. Pillar 4. Meaningful connection, the human antidote to anxiety. Humans are tribal creatures. We evolved to belong, to family, to community, to purpose. But social media tricks the brain into pseudo-connection. Hundreds of interactions, none of them intimate. Haidt cites research showing that loneliness among teens has doubled since 2010, even as digital connection skyrocketed. The cure isn't more messages, it's depth. Face-to-face conversations, shared activities, vulnerable moments, the kind that require time and trust, not Wi-Fi. Story example. In one of Haidt's case studies, a school in Colorado banned phones entirely during school hours. At first, students rebelled. Then something strange happened. By week 3, the cafeteria was loud again, with laughter. By month 2, cliques softened. By the end of the semester, teachers reported fewer anxiety referrals than any year before. Connection was restored, not digitally, but biologically. The moral core of the 4 pillars. These aren't just lifestyle tweaks, they're moral choices. They represent a return to trusting the human process. Trusting that kids can grow strong if we let them. That risk builds courage. That real presence beats digital performance. In Haidt's words, we built a world that made children safe, but not strong. Now we must build one that makes them strong enough to stay safe. Rebuilding culture, the new social revolution. Every great shift in human history starts the same way. First, a small group notices that something feels off. Then they name it. Then they fix it. Haidt believes we are living in that awakening moment, the point where the damage of the phone-based childhood has become undeniable, but also the point where we have a chance to design a healthier culture, one that balances progress with presence. He calls this process the rebirth of common sense. The institutional awakening. When Haidt began speaking publicly about teen mental health in 2018, he says most schools, policymakers, and tech companies brushed it off. They said, kids have always had challenges. This is just the new normal. But now the data is too loud to ignore. Rates of self-harm among teen girls doubled after 2010. Boys report record levels of loneliness and academic disengagement. Schools are spending more on counselors than on extracurriculars. The pattern is global, from the US to the UK, from India to Australia. Anywhere smartphones and social media took hold, youth anxiety followed. The conclusion? This isn't about culture, it's about design. Education, from information to formation. Schools, Haidt argues, are the first battleground. Because education was never meant to just transfer knowledge, it was meant to form character. He suggests schools rethink their mission entirely. Not how do we prepare kids for tests, but how do we prepare them for reality? Here's what the new model looks like. Tech boundaries in schools. Phones locked away during the day. Social media off limits. Classrooms become spaces of attention again. Outdoor learning revived. Field projects, exploration, play-based experiments, reintroducing risk and movement into learning. Emotional resilience training, teaching students to name feelings, regulate stress, and navigate social conflict, skills as vital as math or coding. Schools that try this, like one in the Netherlands that removed all smartphones, report calmer students, deeper friendships, and better grades. Turns out attention is the secret ingredient to intelligence. Technology, the ethical reckoning. If schools are one battleground, tech companies are the other. For years, they've acted like cigarette manufacturers in the 1950s, denying harm, marketing to kids, and claiming user choice absolves them. But the tide is turning. In 2023, a coalition of 33 U.S. states sued Meta for knowingly designing addictive features that harm young users. European regulators have begun forcing transparency and age verification. And even Silicon Valley insiders Engineers, designers, psychologists are turning whistleblower. A quiet rebellion is spreading inside the tech world. Tristan Harris, former Google design ethicist, helped launch the Time Well Spent movement, calling for humane technology that serves people, not algorithms. Haidt echoes this sentiment. We don't need to abandon technology. We need to build wise technology. He envisions future platforms that reward meaningful conversation, not outrage. Social media that supports real-world friendship instead of replacing it. AI that helps children learn, not trap them in infinite scrolls. It's not impossible. It just requires one moral decision from creators to design for flourishing. Parents, the grassroots revolution. Cultural change rarely begins with governments or corporations. It begins in kitchens. Parents are the new activists, not waving banners, but setting boundaries. They're starting local, phone-free childhood groups, agreeing on collective rules so no kid feels left out. They're choosing schools with stricter digital policies. They're banding together online, ironically, to coordinate an offline movement. One mother Haidt interviews said, "I used to think my kid would be isolated if she didn't have a phone. Now I realized the phone was what was isolating her." That's the paradox of our age. Connection without community. Freedom without focus. Every parent who reclaims dinner time, eye contact, and silence is building a micro-revolution, one home at a time. Government and policy. Guardrails for the future. Haidt doesn't argue for heavy censorship or surveillance. He argues for guardrails. Just as society once created laws for child labor, food safety, and seat belts, we now need digital protections for developing minds. Policies might include age restrictions for social media accounts, verified through digital ID. Transparency laws, forcing platforms to disclose algorithmic effects on minors. Funding for play spaces and mental health education in schools. He points to the analogy of lead paint. We used it everywhere, cheap, colorful, seemingly harmless. Then we discovered it damaged developing brains, and we banned it. Today's lead paint is algorithmic manipulation, invisible, profitable, and toxic until we choose to remove it.
Culture. Restoring the sacred ordinary. Beneath policy and parenting lies the cultural soul. Haidt believes the real revolution is philosophical, rediscovering what it means to be human. Modern life, he says, treats people as brains on screens. But children are bodies in motion, spirits in formation, hearts that crave belonging. To raise a healthy generation, we must make certain things sacred again. Dinner tables without screens, walks without headphones, playgrounds without surveillance, boredom without panic. Each of these is a quiet rebellion against the attention economy. Imagine a town that turns off all screens every Sunday. At first, people fidget. Then they talk. They rediscover eye contact, board games, laughter. Soon, screenless Sunday becomes the most anticipated day of the week. That's the kind of shift Haidt believes we'll see more of. Not anti-technology, but pro-humanity. Let's zoom out for a second. Maybe this whole crisis, the anxiety, the chaos, the loneliness, is a signal, not a failure. Maybe humanity is going through its adolescent phase with technology. We built it fast, without wisdom. We got hooked. We fell apart. But now we're learning to grow up with it. The anxious generation may be the first to suffer, but also the first to awaken.
Mini recap. At this point in the journey, Haidt has walked us through The diagnosis, how screen-based childhood replaced real experience. The evidence, showing sharp mental health declines. The roots, loss of play, independence, and deep connection. The pillars of restoration, how to rebuild resilience. And now, the blueprint for a cultural shift, from homes to schools, tech firms to governments. It's a complete ecosystem of recovery. But there's one last layer Haidt wants us to understand, the philosophical dimension. Because anxiety isn't just biological, it's existential. That's what we explore next.
The meaning crisis and the path to wisdom. Technology didn't invent anxiety. It just amplified what was already fragile. Every generation wrestles with meaning, the question of who we are, what we value, and how we live. But the digital world accelerated that struggle by fracturing attention, isolating people, and making comparison the default mode of existence. Haidt argues that the real crisis isn't just mental health, it's the loss of meaning. The modern void. For centuries, humans had frameworks for understanding their lives: religion, community, shared rituals, collective struggle. Those gave shape to suffering. They told us why to endure. But in the last few decades, those structures weakened. We replaced purpose with performance. And when performance fails, when the likes fade, the followers disappear, or success feels empty, we're left with the void. The anxious generation isn't just anxious because of dopamine loops, they're anxious because they're untethered. Imagine drifting in space, surrounded by stars, connected to everyone, yet anchored to nothing. That's what social media does to the modern psyche. Infinite contact, no gravity. What we lost, the narrative of growth. In older cultures, adolescence wasn't a waiting room. It was an initiation. You left childhood through challenge. You earned adulthood through hardship. Modern teens? They have none of that. No clear path from dependence to autonomy. No symbolic test of resilience. Instead, they scroll through endless feeds, seeing adulthood as something to consume, not become. Without initiation, anxiety fills the space where identity should form. Reclaiming meaning. 3 anchors. Haidt's closing message isn't despair. It's a call to rediscover anchors of meaning. He identifies 3: purpose, presence, and participation. Purpose, the compass. Purpose isn't found online, it's built offline through effort and struggle. It emerges when you do something that matters beyond you. Haidt challenges parents and educators to ask kids not what do you want to be, but what problem do you want to solve? That shift turns ambition into contribution, and contribution gives meaning to suffering. Presence, the still mind. Presence is the antidote to digital overstimulation. It's the art of returning attention to the now. Haidt draws from Stoic and Buddhist traditions here. Both teach that peace doesn't come from controlling the world, but from mastering one's attention. Every time we sit quietly, breathe, walk without music, or speak without multitasking, we strengthen the muscle of presence. Presence is not passive. It's rebellion against distraction, against speed, against the machine that monetizes your attention. Participation, the circle of life. Humans heal in groups, always have. Haidt writes that we need to rebuild local tribes, not virtual ones, but real communities bound by shared action. That could mean volunteering, mentoring, joining a club, or simply being the friend who shows up. In connection, anxiety dissolves into belonging. The role of wisdom.
Haidt closes with something unusual for a psychologist, a meditation on wisdom. He defines wisdom as pattern recognition across time. It's what allows someone to see beyond trends, beyond emotion, beyond the algorithmic now. Wisdom grows in silence, in suffering, in story. It's what we lose when we outsource thinking to machines, and it's what the next generation must reclaim if we are to thrive alongside technology. Quote from Haidt: "The opposite of anxiety is not calm, it's trust, in self, in others, in the future." That single line captures the heart of his thesis. If we can teach trust, real, grounded trust, we can dissolve the epidemic of fear that defines our time. The journey forward. Imagine this: a decade from now, children playing outside again, schools full of laughter instead of silent screens, technology serving creativity instead of consuming attention. It sounds idealistic, but every cultural revolution begins as idealism before it becomes the new normal. Haidt's book isn't a sermon, it's a blueprint. And like any blueprint, it means nothing unless someone builds from it. That builder could be a teacher who bans phones in class, a parent who leads a local play club, a teenager who deletes social media for a month and feels life rush back in. Change doesn't start with systems, it starts with one decision.
Let's pause right here for a small thought experiment. If your phone disappeared for a week, what would you reach for instead? Who would you call? What would you create? And who might you become without the constant hum of everyone else's lives in your pocket? The anxious generation isn't doomed. It's awakening. Because every anxiety carries a message. Something in the way we're living needs to change. And that realization, painful as it is the beginning of wisdom. If this message resonates, let it spark a small rebellion. Reclaim an hour of your day from screens. Rebuild presence. Rediscover purpose. Reconnect with people in person. That's how we turn the anxious generation into the awake generation. And if you want to continue this journey, watch another groundbreaking book, one that dives even deeper into how purpose transforms anxiety into power. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. A calm mind is not born in silence. It's forged in noise, when we learn to hear what truly matters.